Hyrule has always been, if not the primary focus, then at least a key component of almost every one of Link's adventures. From the pixelated trees of the NES to the show-stopping world of Breath of the Wild, every game brings an exciting new iteration of the fictional land to explore. But what makes this world such an iconic mainstay not only in the series, but in all of pop culture? I'm not sure if it's just me, but I've always thought Hyrule felt so rich because of the villages that inhabit it. Villages and towns are necessary for making high fantasy settings feel lived in, and those of the Legend of Zelda series have always felt so magical to me. I never get tired of seeing Goron Village with their underground utopias or visiting the Zoras in their mystical domains. This led me to wonder, why? Why do these villages stick out in the sea of tropey high fantasy town? What makes the villages of Legend of Zelda so special? Nintendo is undeniably spectacular at creating imaginative worlds that players can and will spend hundreds of hours fostering their own little stories in. This is partially due to the painstaking detail Nintendo crafts the universes with, and the villages of the Legend of Zelda are no exception. Taking a look at practically any town in any main series game, and we see tiny nuances Nintendo didn't have to include, but because they did, make each respective community feel full of life. Most obviously is the populations of each city. There are citizens with classic Nintendo flair in their design that often have their own stories, side quests, or daily routines. Sure, they're usually not that complicated, but their sense of humor and humble understanding of a village as their home makes each town feel much more lively. And when they are more layered, well, then we have some of the most memorable NPCs in gaming. However, despite often being so shallow, characters don't usually blend together into an amalgamation of code, and whether this is due to each character's aforementioned unique design elements, humor, quests, or personalities, the city slickers of Hyrule make the world feel lived in. Some of my favorite NPCs are the Bomber Kids, the cranky old weatherman that you've trapped into a never-ending time loop, and Colin, because his side quest is just so goofy. They all feel different, and even the NPCs with only one line of dialogue don't feel like wasted space. Again, all this adds a striking level of detail to the villages of Hyrule that make them feel ancient and real. This authentic feeling is also due to the extensive lore behind pretty much every main town in the series. These aren't just some random pop-ups like those sketchy amusement parks. The game often gives reasons as to why the cities are placed where they are, the unique gimmick if they have one, and why certain types of citizens populate different towns. For example, Kakariko Village, which we'll be returning to a lot in this video because of its significance in the series. According to the Zelda wiki, the village's origins are elaborated upon during the game, explaining that it was founded by the Sheikah, the guardians of the royal family of Hyrule. Moreover, it is revealed that the village was home to only those pertaining to the Sheikah tribe, although it was later opened up to poor commoners by Impa, who was also born and raised in Kakariko. As such, she is often considered the leader of Kakariko Village, not only for having helped the commoners of Hyrule, but also for her great efforts in turning the village into a great city to equal the bustling metropolis of Hyrule Castle Town. There's a whole backstory to this town that works to build the world of Hyrule. Although it may look like your typical Witcher 3 wooden village with the peasants digging holes and farmers doing their farming thing, it's so much more than that because of the thought and care Nintendo put into the reasoning as to why the city would exist in this land. Not only does this apply to other cities in Ocarina of Time, such as the Kokiri Forest supposedly being the source of all life in Hyrule that maintains balance in the kingdom and is home to Kokiri tribe that are children forever and will die if they leave, but also to different iterations of the same village across the series. Look at Kakariko Village in Twilight Princess. It's a completely different aesthetic from that of Ocarina of Time, being based in the Wild West, but still holds its own significance in that game. In Twilight Princess, Kakariko Village is considered to be a sacred place for the Zora people, since that is where they take their eternal rest. Even though it's just a little something, the inclusion of this tidbit and tangible proof of this rumor in the Zora's graves adds so much to their ramshackle town. But even if there wasn't expansive and purposeful lore, unique populations, and even hidden secrets in some towns, the visuals alone would be able to represent the absolute craftsmanship Nintendo uses to create these luxurious, calming kingdoms. Zora's domain always manages to give off a pristine, relaxing atmosphere. The more quaint villages of Hateno and Kakariko make me want to settle down and live the simple life, admiring all the beautiful vistas Hyrule has to offer. Clocktown and Castletown make me nostalgic for the high fantasy villages that I would most likely die at the age of 20 in. Skyloft and Ordon Village make me feel a part of a cozy, tight-knit community. And don't even get me started on Dragon Roost Island or Rito Village. I just love air-based cities, and these scratch those itches and then some. The aesthetics of these villages are insanely creative and detailed to boot, and all this does loads for the world building. By having such diverse cities, all with their own cultures, populations, and lore in the world, Hyrule feels like a truly ancient kingdom with loads of stories to be told, history to uncover, and spectacular events to take part in, even if it's just filling out a notebook. But after all, this is a video game, so the cities aren't just eye candy. Oftentimes, most notable villages serve a purpose in the story or have some level of interaction on a gameplay level. Again, Kakariko Village is a solid example. In Twilight Princess, it's basically the place to be. It starts as an innocent town Link must save in order to protect his little friends, as it has been taken over by Shadow Beast, with some of the villagers even being turned into these demonic monstrosities. It's actually pretty terrifying. It has the beginning of one of the most iconic moments in series history in the horse chase with King Bulbin, and it is seen in the credits prospering with characters returning to their own home. It's also populated with the bomb shop and many of the game's best items, including the Hylian shield. In fact, a lot of the important cities act in a similar way to Kakariko, with them initially being overrun by villainy, only for Link to save the day, and as the game progresses, new minigames or shops are introduced to give Link new items and abilities. So much of the game's side content exists in these villages, with one of the best examples being Castletown in Ocarina of Time. When first visiting, it's probably the happiest place imaginable. It's like a Disney movie. You've got people dancing until the end of time, jesters, a mask shop, wait a second, but also the historic Temple of Time, and minigames where some of Ocarina of Time's best upgrades are just begging to be won, like the bowling alley and shooting gallery. However, this once festive town is brought to ruin 7 years in the future, acting as a representation of Ganon's destruction, and motivation for Link to bring the world back to normalcy. And man, this hits. The wear and tear this town has been through hurts to look at. There's literally zombies walking around. What if these were the dancers? Breath of the Wild also uses the decay of iconic locations as world building and a narrative device. Visiting this version of Castletown brings sadness instead of glee, as we can only imagine the festivities that once took place and are now lost to time. The impact of evil hurts the most when it is done on your home village. In storytelling, there is usually an old world the hero exists in, and the new world they must explore to complete their journey. In adventure narratives, these are quite literal, with the protagonist's hometown often being a humble homestead with not much going on, until the evils of the main villain take over, forcing the hero to venture into a new world to save the day. This manifests in Kakariko Village, Kokiri Forest, Ordon Village, and the majority of starting locations in the Zelda titles, always pushing the player to save what they once called home when faced with destruction. Essentially, these towns become a part of the player because of their incredible detail. We fall in love with these villages, and the game uses this to serve the narrative, ripping the carpet out from underneath us by presenting the player with the corpse of their favorite locations, serving as motivation to save the day. These cities are also home to side quests and minigames that allow for player progression, therefore serving both a gameplay and narrative purpose throughout the series. But I just can't go any longer without talking about the sheer beauty of these locations again, because god damn, they are stunning. I don't think I've ever seen more places I would want to live in any video game more than the Legend of Zelda series. Look at the pure elegance of Zora's Domain, or the foresty awe of Breath of the Wild's Kakariko Village, or the comforting atmosphere of Skyloft, or the cuteness of the Minish Village, or you know what, I could go on forever. The point is that Nintendo is amazing at integrating creative ideas into tangible locations to make some of the most breathtaking towns I've ever seen. Sure, the idea seems simple at first. Let's make a fire city, let's make a water city. Better yet, let's make a town city. But the idea is never as surface level as it seems. Nintendo always manages to go all out with their villages to make something truly unique, either based off of real world and in-game history, or just straight up creativity. In her article about the real life inspirations behind Breath of the Wild's villages, Meredith Lord writes this about Kakariko Village. This All-Sheikah oasis is filled with thatched roof houses built on terraces, lush foliage, flowing streams, hanging wooden wind chimes, Tajiri gates, and small stone-carved idols that represent guardian spirits. Quite a bit of the architectural design in Breath of the Wild is known to be based on that of the ancient Jomon civilization. It is the rural aspects of real-life cities that inspired the magical element of this beautiful town. And when real-life inspiration is paired with in-game history, the villages feel much more alive, a blend between reality and fantasy that results in an absolutely gorgeous setting that I want to live in so bad. Please, somebody make it happen. Then there's the fact that no city is a simple idea brought to life, as every premise is taken to its creative extreme. Goron City in Breath of the Wild isn't just a city with lava because Gorons like it hot, but a mining superpower because of its location and Death Mound that transfers goods across Hyrule. The houses are made of iron, with every single one looking like a blacksmith. Waterfalls of lava and hot springs dot the city, coating it with piping hot steam. It's surrounded by red rock, creating an overpowering atmosphere, and oh yeah, there's a giant carving of the city's old guardian in the mountainous terrain. Along with the fact that each city has its own unique theme music, and you have towns that are always more than the shallow interpretation of what a fire village would look like. Again, a simple premise is taken to the extreme, which always results in memorable, unique locations that have a personality of their own. Goron City matches the exuberant macho power of its inhabitants. Again, Zora's Domain has a pristine look with its drawbridges, waterfalls, peaceful soundtrack, and Sistine Chapel-esque design with glass and light blues being the foundation of the city that matches the elegant atmosphere the Zoras embody. Kokiri Forest in Ocarina of Time has wooden huts, ponds, and a little maze that captures the spirit of childlike adventure. However, although every town feels unique and has different atmospheres, I think every memorable town both embodies a spirit of adventure and a sense of quaint comfort that is so important to the identity of this series. Even though Goron City is overpowering in its theme, I feel like I could have a grand old time drinking with the Goron Bros whenever I visit. As stated before, Hatsuno Village feels comfortable to simply exist in, with its layered farming, rolling hills, lush greenery, and villagers whose biggest worry is if the cute secretary likes them or not. No matter how big and boisterous a city is, it always feels at home in the Zelda universe because of the way they're designed. Every town feels like a piece of your adventure that you'd love to stop and relax at. Again, this could be due to the level of detail and lore. Having towns feel ingrained into the world makes the kingdom as a whole feel more realized, meaning they're more exciting to explore as well as just exist in. I could stand at the foot of the rural Kakariko village and listen to its swaying breeze for hours on end. The fact of the matter is that the aesthetics of these villages are unique in style but unified in purpose, rich in real life and in-game history to add a texture to the world, therefore only increasing its adventurous and comforting atmosphere that exists in the best of these Zelda cities. But there's something deeper here than just aesthetics giving me that cozy, coming home for the holidays feeling. One aspect of the series that I love is the legend of it all. Although the majority of games are standalone adventures, none of them exist in a vacuum. Wind Waker's Hyrule may be underwater, but take one look at the timeline that resembles neurons, and you'll see how it stays in line with the history of the series. Not only does this legend make the games feel more grand as a whole, but it means we see many different iterations of the same locations and characters throughout the series. I never get sick of revisiting Zora's Domain, Goron City, Kakariko Village, and Temple of Time, or anything in between. Even though the presentation is usually different to match the tone and narrative of each game, the varying cultures supports the long-form narrative of the series, making locations feel iconic instead of like rehashed ideas. Needless to say, returning to these villages feels like coming home, and there's a reason for this. According to Jeremy Saucerman, instructional designer with a master's degree in educational psychology, returning more often to the same town can build an affinity for it. So the familiarity effect is, the more frequently we encounter something, a stimulus, a person, thing, a place, the more likely we are to like it. That's why we like songs we hear, Saucerman says. That's kind of how marketing works too. You encounter the stimulus a lot, so you're much more likely to recognize it and then like it. So if you're talking about having played several Zelda games, I think that would definitely play into it. You've experienced it a lot, and so that definitely increases your likelihood of really liking it. That's why coming back to my hut in Hatsuno Village feels relaxing every time, or despite the drastic changes between games, no village feels like anything but my childhood home. Of course, this is also because of everything else we talked about. If Nintendo decided to make a town I once loved ugly or underdeveloped, then I probably wouldn't be as enthused, but as we said, Nintendo doesn't play that way. Instead, the villages of Legend of Zelda are consistently enjoyable, detailed, and creative, making them a joy upon revisiting instead of a chore. I don't think I'll ever get tired of these cities, not just because of the literal science backing it up, but because even the most pixelated populations are created with such care and originality. I'll always feel welcome at these spots, and I'll always return with open arms, whether to save them from calamity or just to sit back and watch the clouds idle by in one of my favorite fantasy locations.